Good morning, everyone. I'm Glenn Archambault. I'm with the Trust, and it's great to stand here and see a lot of familiar faces, folks that have come for all the years of the conference, and I'm going to take a moment for a history moment about the Trust and the conference here. In the first conference, it was a little tense, I got to tell you. There was a lot of folks that were sitting there going, boy, what am I doing here? And we had a really funny moment. My son Mac and I brought this very complicated presentation, and we couldn't put it on a memory stick, and we had all kinds of tech people. Pretty soon we had guys from the pipeline industry that thought they could run a computer, and we had the tech guys in the back. We finally said, oh man, what are we going to do? So we hooked the laptop directly into their equipment. My son sat down and started to run it. And Admiral Barrett, who was the head of PHMSA at that time, walks up behind him and goes, wow, what is the sheep farm kid doing running all my equipment at this? And it kind of really broke the ice, you know. I mean, people kind of saw that we were all pretty regular people. And something I've watched each year, you know, I look out there right now, we got people sitting next to each other that didn't know each other, come from all kinds of backgrounds, and that's really great. And what this is about is watching folks do something that they weren't regulated to do. I mean, PHMSA didn't send industry to New Orleans at the first conference, and they didn't send the Pipeline Safety Trust or landowners. It was something people did on their own. They stood up and said, you know, I can do that, and nobody needs to tell me to do that. And so we got a panel here today, and I know these folks. They know what they're talking about. They've got great backgrounds, and that's what they're going to tell us about, not what PHMSA ordered them to do, but what they decided to do on their own. And so we're behind schedule, so we're going to ask Andy to move right along and everyone else because we've got to keep this conference moving. So are you ready, Andy Drake? Good. And are you, I know this guy. Do the rest of you know this guy? Come on up, Andy. Andy's with Spectra Energy.
Yes.
That's right. I'm just kidding you guys.
A little nervous there for a second. I didn't know where we were going with that. But thanks. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I think that pipeline safety certainly has an issue that's garnering a lot of attention right now. I think you know, from the media we're seeing a lot of attention. We're seeing a lot of attention legislatively, regulators, the public. And the operating community as well, and I think that is deservedly so. As Cynthia said, unfortunately. I'm going to provide just a little background into some things that the Interstate Natural Gas Association, the gas transmission operators, are doing in a plan to advance pipeline safety. I think, you know, as we said, Carl said, we're engineers. I think fundamentally we have to resist our pragmatic nature a little bit here. We come fully loaded with technical natures and we break problems down. That's what we've been trained to do. But I think there's a very human side of this that we have to be very conscious of. And I think that's some lessons that we're learning. And how do we not just hunker down and close down inside ourselves to use our engineering talents, but how do we listen better and get better perspectives on what's driving concerns from other stakeholders? Is a fundamentally different, I think, approach to solving some of the issues we're facing. I think it's an interesting perspective. 15 years ago, President Clinton signed into law the Accountable Pipeline Safety and Partnership Act, which really promoted a performance-based regulatory approach to complement the historical prescriptive approach that we in the U.S. have and use very robustly. Our Canadian counterparts are in a very, very different environment and use a very, very different approach, and I think that's something that we should put our ears up about. It was really designed to promote a performance-based regulatory approach. It's really recognizing the limitations of a prescriptive-only approach. A one-size-fits-all becomes too burdensome, and it's really almost impracticable to try to address the myriad of combinations and permutations of things that can happen. And what ends up happening is you end up playing whack-a-mole. You become very prescriptive about a specific situation or event, and you define a regulation about that. The problem is much more complex than that. And we need to respect that fundamentally. And that's kind of what this was designed to do, is back away from these very pragmatic, technically specific answers and look at the problem. And how do you better address that problem? I think subsequently, backing away, we looked at risk management 10 years ago, integrity management protocols, how to do this a little differently. We've seen some steady efforts to evolve risk-based approach, including the 2002 Pipeline Safety Act and the HCAs and all those things that fell out of that. It was a good place to start. Through these efforts, we've seen some improvements. I think that's important to kind of understand that philosophy is working. It's still got some hair on it. We still have some room to grow that for sure. I think that's evidenced via some significant incidents that have happened where people have been killed and hurt. That's not okay. It cannot be rationalized away. It's something we have to step into the space and own. And I think we've got to embrace that challenge and that responsibility to move that bar up. I think we've got some good tools to work with, but we've got some room to grow for sure. I think, earlier this year, the ENGA board, the board level, these are the CEOs and the presidents of the big companies, came together and formed a task force and defined some guiding principles to underpin this change. What do we need to do differently? This is not okay. What are we going to have to change to get there and create a sustainable solution? I think that central to these principles that you see up here, I'm not going to read all these, is really a goal around zero incidents. It's not a flag-waving goal. I think what we really try to do is back up and look at other industries that share a very similar fingerprint to this industry, and that is low frequency, highly unacceptable consequences. Industries like the nuclear industry, industries like the medical industry, industries like the airline industry, industries like the chemical industry. Look at these industries, and we've seen a step change in those industries over time. How did they do that? What they fundamentally did was they took their safety programs, their personnel safety programs, which are an absolute zero tolerance, very high level of ownership, no rationalization about poor performance, no excuses accepted, and they had converted it into their operating models, fundamentally. They worked with their regulators and changed that relationship of how to collaborate, to learn and improve. And those models are very heavily based on continuous improvement, an iterative, never-ending approach to learn and improve. And it gets away from the whack-a-mole mindset, and it really takes risk management to another level. And I think that those are fundamentally something that we're trying to get in here. It's fundamentally back away and stop trying to come up with the whack-a-mole solution and look at the problem, look at the culture, stop rationalizing about performance issues, and start figuring out how do you improve this and how do you make this sustainable. I think that when we look at the NTSB recommendations in San Bruno, we fundamentally share those goals. They're very high-level goals. They're very lofty goals. They're certainly a huge challenge to us. I think it's incumbent on us to define an action plan and a map that's practicable to get there, where we extract the most value as quickly as possible against those goals. If everything's a priority, nothing's a priority, and that's where you end up in whack-a-mole. PHMSA has the same responsibility. I see Linda sitting here. I know that PHMSA is wrestling with the same issues. I think to effectuate those principles, we went out and canvassed all the stakeholders we could find, literally. I know many of the people in this room, we've kind of worn you out. And I appreciate that. Appreciate the fact that you meet with us and talk with us. We've met with the Pipeline Safety Trust. We've met with National Safety Fire Marshals. We've met with NARUC, NAPSR. We've met as many folks as we can find to try to vet this out. What is it that you're concerned about? What can we do to change this model? I think that we came up with a 9-step action plan. I'm not going to go through all that. I know we're kind of trying to click along, and I think that's right. The thing I think you can take out of this is it's really more of a systematic approach to fingerprint the problem. Understand what the problem is. Develop a comprehensive solution that deals with that. And it may bring in some very different kinds of solutions that we're not used to. Maybe things that aren't just totally pragmatic, or technical in nature. I think you've got to look at some elements here. We've got to address the biggest concerns first. I think you got to work to less risky areas next over time, particularly where technology come into avail to help that and facilitate that being done. And I think you are explicitly looking to provide the biggest improvement to pipeline safety and to public safety and identify technology gaps. I think we have to resist the temptation for simple solutions. Simple solutions, frankly, aren't sustainable. That's how we end up here again in so many years from now. It felt good for a while. Unfortunately, that ship doesn't sail very far. I think when we look at this is to focus on the three key elements I've got highlighted. I think these are the big ones. I'll talk about these in a few more minutes. Applying risk management beyond high consequence areas. How do we demonstrate fitness or service of pre-regulation pipes, and how do you respond to an incident? These are commitments that INGA and the operating companies are making as a result of a lot of discussions. I think the issue about extending risk management, we had a meeting with the Pipeline Safety Trust, and I remember Glenn looking at me and he goes, "Focus on the people, stupid." It's like, all right, well, that's not intrinsically obvious right away when we're kind of almost trained to think miles and assets and physical, and break us out of that model and look at the people. So we've tried to convert our focus into where are the people. And I think the thing that we're seeing here is looking at, we currently are required by law to do HCAs. That represents mathematically 6% of the mileage. But to do that, we are finding that we have to expand the focus to the people beyond that. I think right now where we are is we've over-tested quite a bit to get to that 6%. That's a good thing. I think we're in the 80-some% range of doing something, and that's the key thing. Something has been done at 80%. The goal is to get to 90% of the population nearby the pipeline using integrity management principles by 2012. That's next year. That's a commitment to us to help center the operating community. You've got to get back to using integrity management principles, not just pigs, by 2012 to 90%. And then what we're really trying to do is get that to be consistently done at a deeper level over the next 8 or 10 years. I think here 8. But you're looking to try to get the entire breadth of ASME B318S, integrity management, and its depth applied to those 90% consistently. The inconsistently part is where the risk is. The fact that it's been pigged is interesting. San Bruno was not a pipe that had been corroded. Okay, that's interesting that a pig may or may not have found that issue, but it still blew up. You have to deploy the whole bandwidth of integrity management, which includes material threats and other issues which pigs may or may not find. Then to look to extend it to 100% of the population nearby pipeline using integrity management by 2020 or 2030. Obviously, the quick question, and why not 100% right now? This is a true Pareto paradigm right here. There's 10% of the pipelines that are not readily accessible. There is no technology that's available to get to those pipes. You're going to spend a huge amount of money and energy and time trying to push a rope to get to those. What you want to try to do, I think, is use time to create technology to deal with those so that they can be done effectively. Don't diffuse all your energy of the 90% to deal with the 10%. Don't dismiss the 10%. Stay focused on them. Build a plan, understand what the issues are, and marshal energy to build a roadmap and technology to close that gap so you can figure out how to deal with them. But if you don't respect the Pareto paradigm here, you end up diffusing all the energy off the 90 to deal with the 10, and that's kind of where Glenn is. That's not helping the 90. With that, we move to demonstrate fitness for service of pre-regulation pipes. I know that the grandfather clause has been getting a lot of use lately, a lot of talk going around it. There's a lot of concern about it. Many have noted that they want to get rid of it. We met with Senator Rand Paul here a few weeks ago he had a hold on the pipeline safety bill, and went in and asked him, what's your concerns? He said, I want to get rid of the grandfather clause. Like, what do you mean when you say that? And he said, I want to make sure the old pipes are safe. It's like, okay, that's different. I think we're on a trail to try to do that. We have some issues to do to close that, and I think that the things we did 10 years have done a lot of things towards that, but not enough. What do we need to do to move that? The term fitness for service actually has gotten a lot of press, as well as the grandfather clause. Fitness for service is not a new clause. It's not a spin doctoring thing. Fitness for service is the basis, the chassis on which integrity management rides. You're basically just looking at what are the threats that compromise the service or integrity of a facility, and then defining very clearly what are the tools that look for them, what are the criteria of acceptability, and what do you have to do to fix it. That's fitness for service. That's integrity management. They're not synonyms, but fitness for service has been a long-standing term that's been used in industries beyond ours for a very, very long time. I think that we're really trying to understand figuring out how to do this appropriately is a big deal. I mean, the grandfathered pipes represent pipes basically that were built before regulation. That's really what they mean. These pipes were built before the federal regulations came into play in 1970. That represents 60% of the U.S. infrastructure. That's a lot. So, some of those pipes have been tested and inspected using the same criteria as pipes built today. That's also a good thing. I think we have to figure out what is the concern and develop a solution that carefully focuses our efforts on the problem. And I think Inga has developed a process to define the fitness for service of those pipes and really focus our energies on trying to test the pipes that have not been tested in the HCAs. Start there. That's where the people are. Focus our energies in those places, make sure those pipes are fit for service, and then using a combination of developing technologies and lessons learned from that HCA testing experience to fingerprint the bad guys so that you can extend this, again, iteratively out beyond to the lesser populated areas. I think you're just looking at where to start and subsequently apply that out to the rest of the pipes. Mitigation of incidents, I think that this issue is really something we did a lot of lessons learned with the national fire marshals, state fire marshals. We have had several meetings with them looking at what do you need from us? What is it that you want or need that helps facilitate emergency response? And they said basically we need rapid recognition and certainty of response. Okay, we basically came out of that in discussions with them an hour. It's a starting point for a discussion. Where did that hour come from was basically the conversations with the state fire marshals on how to respond. I think there's other things that we learned in these discussions, and that is the issue of secondary damage. 10 years ago, we looked very pragmatically at this. Impact zones in our engineering minds kicked in, failure, damage, and all these things, and we modeled this, and we understood what to do. Valve closure and emergency response didn't necessarily represent a significant change in the damage pattern, but that's where the engineering mind made a mistake. There's another issue at stake here, or other issues at stake here, and that is the issue of control and access and the public's response to a fire burning. Okay, I think what we're trying to do now is regrip that and figure out how to change that model. And I think there may be things that we have to keep in mind here about secondary damage. There may be places that are much more susceptible to secondary damage, places where you may need to even get in there faster than this. All right, but this is the product of a conversation with those guys. We got a lot of insight out of those meetings with them. I think, what's needed is really back to the guiding principles. We need to really actively engage the other stakeholders to understand the issues and the needs to effectively address and, collaborate on figuring out what everybody needs here to close those issues down. I think that we have to ensure that everybody understands the technical capabilities and limitations and gaps and how do you fix them and how are they deployed so that we make good choices on focusing our energy constructively to strike a good balance. I think it's critical to practicability and to minimize inordinate impact. You don't want to get distracted and wish there was an easy answer, but there's not, and all of a sudden you just dispersed huge amounts of energy and got very little value out of it. That's not healthy for anybody. And I think that stay focused on the big issues, stay focused on people, and provide time via some sort of iterative, risk-based staging to evolve technology to fill in the gaps and improve how we address on a wider scale those same issues. I'm trying to move along here. Demonstrable actions, I think that you can kind of skate through this. I think the point here is actions speak louder than words. It's easy for me to stand up here and say, oh, we see this, we've got to change all this. What are you doing? All right, we've met with a ton of people. We've written a ton of white papers trying to figure out how to change our culture and how to fill in this gap. We've got our executives to step on the line, put their toes on the line and make commitments of what they will do absent any regulatory direction, absent any legislative mandate. We are committed to do these things. I think that we're not really waiting. We're hopeful that Congress will pass a Pipeline Safety Act bill this year. I think that's important that they weigh in on this. I think it's important that they provide us some guidance and guardrails on that. Nevertheless, we're moving forward with our plan. We're trying to engage you. We filed our comments early to the ANPRM on purpose so that we put out there the product of these discussions so you can comment on it. I think that's a genuine effort to try to communicate, and I hope that you will look at our comments. I hope you will provide us with comments so we can continue to dial in this plan. With that, I'll turn it over to Glenn.